You know, Alice and I are always looking to be more healthy, and we were just talking about how fasting is one of the best ways to do that, but it's so hard. But the great thing about Prolon is that's not what you're doing. It's not that you're not eating for 5 days. Instead, you're using their science-backed program to convince your body you're fasting.
You guys, this 5-day program really is amazing. It comes beautifully packaged and it does all the thinking for you. Each day is its own box. And by following their program, I know I just feel so much better. And I can't wait to experience Prolong Next Gen and continue to see results. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next Gen at special savings. Prolong is offering the Prosecutors listeners 15% off site-wide plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/prosecutors. That's PROLONLIFE.com/prosecutors to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/prosecutors. A true crime podcast.
It got me upset because this is someone's kid, and someone knows she's gone.
That takes a different approach.
It was shocking for something like this to happen in our little town.
Focusing on the communities affected by life-shattering crimes.
It made news throughout the entire region that these two people had been shot while they slept in such a safe community.
To give a new perspective on the devastation crimes can cause.
It was shocking for something like this to happen in our little town.
Featuring cases from quiet towns to bustling cities and interviewing the people closest to the case.
My first thought was that it's an unusual location for us to have a homicide.
Listen to the true crime podcast City Confidential and step beyond the yellow tape to learn just how far a crime can reach.
There are certain cases in the history of Boston that I think sort of define the city. I think this is one of them.
New episodes of the City Confidential podcast are available every Thursday, available wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode of The Prosecutors is brought to you by Huggies Little Movers. Get your baby's butt into Huggies Little Movers. We got you, baby. I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are The Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, 2 men build a manor in the woods to escape the chains of modern society. But what really happens at this mountain escape? Satanism, sex parties, and ultimately, murder. Welcome to this, the first episode of October. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my undead co-host, Alice.
So undead, but fully scared, because we are entering the month that just creeps me out. And Brett is so happy. I think it brings him extra joy that this month literally makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I'm a scaredy cat, I admit.
And I want y'all to know we're recording this in August, because that's how excited we are about October, that we've already begun to record our October episodes. And look, there's going to be 5 weeks of October, so we kind of got to get on it.
That's why we're getting started early. We don't want something to happen in the next month that you guys would deign to miss a week of October. So we're here for you.
October always starts for me the 1st of September, really after Labor Day. So I indulge summer through Labor Day. And then it's Halloween until October 31st. And then November 1st, it's Christmas. So, I love this time of year, not only because of Halloween, which I love, but I also love Christmas because I'm a man. I contain multitudes. I love all sorts of things, even things that aren't related. So
you are Hallmark's poster boy. They're like, we love someone. We can sell everything to Brett.
What Hallmark needs to do is embrace Halloween and make Halloween love stories the next Christmas love story. I mean, fall festivals, haunted houses, costumes, balls. There's so much you can do with it. It's got all the makings of Christmas. It's just towns that love Halloween instead of towns that love Christmas. Small towns that love Halloween. You add something a little spooky in there, maybe have some murder mysteries. You could make $1 billion. I love Christmas movies, but come on, guys. We've been doing a lot of Christmas movies. It's time to branch out. Build the formula out.
Look, I'm no economist anymore, but I don't think it's $1 billion idea. I think you can make money. But I think the fact that the 80% that are listening may show us that Christmas is a better market. But with that, if you are looking for all of those things and just good old true crime, boy, do we have a story for you. And Brett, I don't even know where to get started on this because that's quite the intro. But it's true. When you throw in sex parties, when you throw in manor, castle, some may even call it, and you call in the woods, I mean, this is a like Grimm's brother fairy tale, except with a very gruesome ending.
I mean, when you call your house Corpsewood Manor, you have to expect
I would never do
something
that.
Crazy is going to happen.
I'm going to call mine like Eternal Light.
Yeah, exactly. House of Eternal Light.
Don't murder me here. This is Eternal Light Lane.
Yeah, exactly. So trust me, for those of you who remain, and I just want you all to know you are my favorite. Don't tell the 20% that, but who cares what they think? Because we don't love them anymore. You guys are my favorite, and you're in for a great true crime story, because that's what this is. As we always say about October, most of our episodes have a direct connection to true crime, and this is very much a true crime story. So let's dive into it. I've blabbed enough. You guys just know how excited I get about this.
Let the man get excited. Look at him. He is gushing. Okay, before we get started, just to whet y'all's appetite, because I know I'm usually the Debbie Downer of like, I'm so scared, I don't want to do this case. The thing about this case, I think that is the creepiest, is that no one knows it's a real life horror story until basically it's over. That's what's so crazy about it. It's like, it's just a story, including the victims, until everything just goes south all at once. And it really makes you question, like, how does humanity take such a dark turn?
It's true. And what's interesting about this case is the case kind of has a twist built into it, because when you begin learning about it, you assume it's going to go a certain way, sort of a stereotypical horror movie way. But in fact, the people you assume are going to be the bad guys turn out to be the victims. And, you know, the sort of teenagers turn out to be the bad guys. It's the inverse of your classic horror tale. So let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll start with Charles Lee Scudder. Now, he was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on October 6th, 1926. And his parents were wealthy. He came from a wealthy family, a family that had a lot of means. And so the importance of education and higher education was always something that was emphasized. In fact, for the time, very rare thing, both his parents had actually gone to college, and they really pressed upon him knowledge. And he attended the University of Wisconsin, where he studied zoology and languages. While there, he met his first wife, Helen Kilbourne Hazlett, who attended a nearby college. And they were only 19 when they wed, but, you know, like a lot of young marriages, it doesn't last long. So by 1949, Charles has completed his master's degree, and he's married his second wife, Borte Bunting, which is a great name, by the way. Borte Bunting. And they had, I guess, a more successful marriage in some ways. They had 4 children together. But by the late 1950s, the pair had split up, and Charles had moved from Wisconsin to Chicago. And even though his personal life had some problems, his professional life was having a lot of success. He was teaching biology at the University of Illinois. In 1964, he received his PhD in pharmacology and began teaching the subject at Loyola University. Now, at the same time, he's sort of started to take some twists and turns in his life. He's been on the straight and narrow for a long time, right? Going to college, getting his degrees, getting married, having kids. But honestly, it wasn't really him. And at this point is when he starts to, let's say blossom. Well, he's blossom is what he's doing.
It's a coming of age story for him.
Exactly. He takes up an assistant directorship at Stritch's Institute for the Study of Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. And here, Scudder, I assume, gets wrapped up into what would later become MK Ultra, because he is doing government-funded experiments with psychoactive drugs, most prominently LSD.
Isn't that
And
crazy?
he was an interesting.
This was like government funded.
Government LSD.
The government was funding LSD parties. Like, I wonder what happens if we give some people LSD. Oh no, let's take some taxpayer dollars
Let's
and
see.
see.
Let's see.
just
Put
see.
a little LSD in the punch bowl and see what happens, right? I mean, that's essentially what we're
Literally,
doing.
that's what happened.
I mean, if you're going to get experimented on by the government, we've done much worse. I mean, giving people
This is
LSD
true.
when they don't know it is pretty bad.
At least let
but,
people have a little fun.
Yeah. You know, when I was growing up, I grew up in a pretty impoverished area, and we would often talk about government cheese. I don't know if you guys are familiar with government cheese. Is government cheese something you're familiar with?
No, I'm not
Alice?
familiar with
Government cheese was the best cheese. It was like full of fat and calories, and it was tasty. It was the best cheese. You would have loved it. Amazing cheese. Much like government cheese, government LSD is the best LSD. It's like the highest quality. You know, it's kind of like Breaking Bad. If you really know what you're doing, you can make some really good drugs. And that was the thing with government LSD. And so Charles, he is involved in this, and he is very unusual for professors of the time. He had dyed his hair bright colors. He kept a pet monkey, and he was often referred to as, shockingly, an eccentric. He was also an official member of the Church of Satan, although he didn't share this publicly, probably at the time, not a great thing to share. And I'll just note, Church of Satan. Satanists always get upset by the implication that they worship Satan. I don't know how people would get confused and think that members of the Church of Satan, who call themselves Satanists, worship Satan. But in fact, they don't. It's more of like this sort of esoteric, free love, unbounded by the strictures of society. Most people in the Church of Satan are actually atheists, though you do have people who are more sort of earth spirity, Wiccans and that kind of thing. Luciferians are the ones who are actually Satanists in sort of your classic horror movie sense. So Charles, he's a Satanist. Obviously, if most people knew that at the time, they would have assumed really not a good thing to be. Bad guy, right? But he also was this sort of, he is removing the weights of his traditional upbringing, I guess is one way to put it.
Which is really interesting, right? Because not saying anything about where we went to law schools, but he fits right in with the academia right now. I wouldn't say he's weird
really
at all.
does.
He's really the
really
prototype. But it's really interesting, especially this like academic background. I mean, he's born in 1926, and to have a mother who went to college, I think this really tells you a lot about where he came from and why he is able to take all these twists and turns later in life. Because essentially, he's what you would call, he had a lot of safety nets, right? Intellectually, he was exposed to the world in a way that most people were not at this time. And he did a lot with it. I mean, he got a PhD, he's teaching, but I will say, I love professors. I've been an adjunct professor, as have you, Brett. But he is in the perfect environment for, first of all, the government LSD, but also having time to think about esoteric things and to begin to experiment life and living outside the box, which is going to lead to what is to come next. So far, he's just your professor, albeit with a pet monkey and bright colored hair. But after moving to Chicago, Charles Scudder met Joseph Odom, or Joey. Joey was born on March 27th, 1938 in Cook County, Illinois, to a working class family. A really far cry from Charles's own upbringing. Joey had dropped out of school in the 5th grade, and he ultimately ended up in some legal troubles. And he got sent to prison for those legal troubles. But while he was in prison, he learned to cook. And it was a passion that would follow him throughout his life. So despite these very different upbringings, Charles and Joey hit it off. And Charles ends up hiring Joey to work at his Chicago mansion. And Joey wasn't just the handyman. Eventually, he actually moves into Charles's mansion and serves as Charles's housekeeper, his cook, errand boy, and his companion. Now, past their professional relationship, we don't exactly know the nature of their personal relationship. I don't think they ever clearly defined it, but it's clear they lived together. They sought companionship with each other, and they were both gay, and they did have an intimate relationship. But whether they actually saw each other as a couple or as the only significant other, I don't really know. But they do live together, and they're going to move and build a home together elsewhere as well.
And it's hard to separate sort of societal norms at the time with what exactly is going on between them, what the nature of their relationship was. It might have been that they just didn't feel like they could define their relationship in that way, and so they kept it more as this, he just works for him. He's like the butler, right? I mean, it's hard to say. A lot of the research for this case comes from a book called The Corpsewood Manor Murders in North Georgia by Amy Petula, and I think the book is good and it's helpful, but it's a little controversial about how some of the facts are portrayed. Like most cases we cover, there are different perspectives on exactly what happened, and this is just one of those areas. But despite this ambiguity about their relationship, there was one thing they definitely had in common. They absolutely hated Chicago. And Charles, he was ready to get out of there. He would complain about his students and how they were uncontrollable. They weren't interested in developing their minds. He didn't like the sort of nature of being a professor. There was a lot of backstabbing. There was a lot of sucking up to try and get ahead. He didn't love that. His neighborhood, he had a really nice home, but it was a situation where the neighborhood was getting worse and worse. It was getting more and more violent, and the property values were dropping. And he basically decided, my parents are dead, Joey's parents were dead, let's get out of here. And that's what they did. And so they made plans to build a mansion in the woods, far from the prying eyes of society, a place where they could be themselves without fear of repercussions, a wonderful paradise way down yonder on the Chattahoochee. Because where are they going to move? North Georgia. What better place to go? Moving to North Georgia, going to start a new life.
Which is quite the difference from the urban neighborhoods of Chicago. And, another thing to note about not only the stuffiness of academia, and it's true, if any of you who've had to go through the tenure process, my understanding is it hasn't changed much in the last century, really. There are certain steps you have to take. It's a very, strict and narrow. You have to publish. You have to make friends with the deans and your colleagues so that they vote for you, those sorts of things. And you have to look like someone who's accepted by other people. And here, at the very least, we know that they are living a lifestyle that was not widely accepted in Chicago or anywhere else at that time. And another thing about his parents, he obviously was taking after a lot of his parents. They were academics, and he himself became a literal academic. His dad died not from natural causes, but because of a violent mugging, which you can imagine in like an idyllic, life, thinking that would never happen if we lived in the woods in North Georgia. Who's going to mug you there? So let's get away from just this rapturous urban Chicago and go to really the most idyllic place we can think of in the mountains. So in 1975, Charles and Joey began searching for an isolated piece of land. They wanted to be basically in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and they found just what they were looking for on a 40-acre plot of land in the middle of the Chattahoochee National Forest in Tryon, Georgia. And Charles bought the land for only $10,500. Not bad for 40 acres of land. And on October 6th, 1976, on his 50th birthday, Dr. Scudder does something that everyone kind of raises their eyebrows at. Despite having this very prestigious position at Loyola, he resigns from his job as professor of pharmacology. As we said earlier, his mom had just died earlier that year, and she had left him a modest inheritance that would amount to about $100 a month. And because he had been teaching for some time, he would have about $111 a month in retirement. So that paired with what his mother left him would get him enough to jumpstart his new life, to move to the middle of nowhere. Not, abundant wealth, but certainly enough to get by. Now, before leaving Loyola, Charles decides to take some things with him. So he's not leaving everything behind in his old life. He decides to take with him 3 vials of government-grade LSD, which totals 12,000 doses. It'll be a lot of fun down in Georgia. And 2 human skulls. Parting gifts. The LSD I get. The skulls, I don't really know.
You might need like a bowl to eat out of. Or
I guess so. I mean, they are pretty cool, but that definitely is I feel like that would have been a crime even back then. But whatever. I think this just shows you, He's not being sentimental. He's taking things he's going to have fun with. And then he's like, I'm taking these 2 skulls with me. And truly, I mean this when he says he's leaving everything else behind because he sells all of his furniture. Remember, he lived in a mansion in Chicago and his parents, did have things that they had left him with. And he gave away almost all of his personal possessions. And in their place, it's not like he bought newer, shinier things. Rather, he bought a camper, a Jeep, and a wood stove to really go back to the land. So he's not trying to lead this, glitzy new life. It is to go back to the earth. And he lists his mansion on Chicago's west side, which sold in just a few weeks, freeing him up from the city he wanted to escape.
Yeah, so now he's got property, he's got some cash, he's got a camper. Time to move to Georgia. So a few months later, in January of 1977, Scudder and Odom, they moved to the 40-acre plot of land that they had purchased in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. And they had this vision of creating a Gothic castle in the woods, completely off the grid of society. They had what everyone needs to succeed. They had their dogs, which were 2 English Mastiffs, Beelzebub and Arsenic, because why not? And
those are beautiful dogs.
Oh,
and those would be difficult dogs to maintain in a city. So I guess they were ready for the mountains.
Exactly. They start driving, and if there was even more reason to get out of Chicago, it's the middle of a blizzard, and they drive for 10 hours through this blizzard to get to the property. By the time they actually get to Georgia, they can't really locate the property, so they spend the night in the car. But the weather improves, and they make it to the site of their new home. Now, it is not perfect. It was covered with these dead, denuded trees, and they found the carcass of a dead horse.
Literally. Literally the carcass of a dead horse. This is the makings of every horror movie, right? You show up to your new home and there's a dead horse there. Because, by the way, horses are very dignified animals. When they die, they really do try to go find somewhere to die in peace, kind of like cats, right? They don't just die in the open. It's kind of a big deal when you find a dead horse.
Well, they found one, and they take it in stride, though. So they name the road to their property Dead Horse Road, which works, right? And they name the land Corpsewood Manor in honor of all these dead-looking trees that surround their house. They're really setting it up to be the kind of place that little kids in neighboring towns will have nightmares about. And that name would become infamous in the years to come.
Get this, adults with financial literacy skills have 82% more wealth than those who don't. From swimming lessons to piano classes, us parents invest in so many things to enrich our kids' lives. But are we investing in their future financial success? With Greenlight, you can teach your kids financial literacy skills like earning, saving, and investing. And this investment costs less than that after-school treat. Start prioritizing their financial education and future today with a risk-free trial at greenlight.com/Wondery. Greenlight.com/Wondery.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Not long after arriving. So this is, in case you are under any impression that this is like other people's moves, I had imagined if you move from Chicago to a whole new state where you've never lived before, you have a little camper filled with all your possessions, you drive across the country, and you pull up to your new home. They pull up to literally 40 acres of trees. There's no house there. There is nothing there. They're quite literally going to build this house from the ground up with their own hands. And I don't know how they know how to do this. I mean, he's a doctor of pharmacology, but he gets a chainsaw. They get concrete mixers and they literally dig out the foundation by hand and they begin to construct their homestead. They dig a well. I guess you could check out books and figure out how to do this. There was no YouTube back then, but they are clearing this land with their own hands. There's no other help. There's just the 2 dogs and the 2 men. And they begin to clear it away, and they make progress because by the summer of 1977, they have completed the first floor of their castle, and it was livable. So they move into this castle as they continue to build it. But as you can probably imagine, North Georgia is going to be very different from Chicago, and life is very different here. It's not perfect. Shortly after moving here in 1977, Charles and Joey, they got into a car accident where Joey was severely injured, and he sustained significant injuries to his leg and also suffered serious brain damage. Charles took care of Joey for an entire year until his injuries ultimately got better. But as you can tell from those types of injuries, Joey did suffer lasting effects from the brain injuries. He had difficulties following conversations, and he often got sidetracked. But this was all while they were building their dream off-the-grid castle house by hand.
But despite these challenges, they have a lot of success. By the winter of 1978, they now have a roof over the 2nd floor, and they're able to fully occupy their home. Now, the manor is an interesting place. It's an oval structure. It's about 44 by 16 feet when completed, so it's not huge, but it has some interesting features. According to Atlanta Magazine, which did an in-depth article on this case, it featured things like a retractable drawbridge, which connected the main house to a sun deck above the entrance gazebo, which sounds delightful. They also had a kitchen in the 1st floor, a dining area, and a library. The 2nd floor had 2 bedrooms, one for each of the men, and a small hallway that led to the door where they had the drawbridge. So, you just wake up in the morning, let your drawbridge down, go over, have some coffee in the woods. It sounds delightful. Now, they had no electricity or other utilities, but they had a well that they built, as Alice said, where they could hand pump water, which sounds terrible, but whatever. Stoves that were wood burning, and plenty of candles, because why not?
Because you live
and it
in a
wasn't just
manor.
the candles. You live in a manor, and you got this whole satanic thing going on. So the candles really work. And the manor did have several features that people have claimed were satanic, including it had only curved walls with no edges, which according to lore was done to protect the residents from evil, because evil will hide in corners. So if you have rooms without corners, where's evil going to hide? It can't. At the top of the entrance to the manor, there was a large pink gargoyle. They had stained glass windows throughout the home, one that depicted a human skull and another that depicted Baphomet, which is the demonic goat god many of you have seen that serves as the official symbol for the Church of Satan. They also had satanic art from top to bottom of this place. And some of the more notable items included a statue of Mephistopheles. Those of you who've ever read Dr. Faust by Goethe, or I think someone else did Faust too, but I always think of the Goethe version. It's really good. Mephistopheles, sort of this demon who tempts you or gives you things when you sell your soul to Satan. He's the guy who makes the bargain. You got to have a middleman. It's like everything else. You think Satan's going to make deals with people? No, he's going to send his lawyer, and that's Mephistopheles. Had pinnacles on the home's 4 chimneys, 2 mirror images of a baby, one depicting the baby emerging from the womb, and the other depicting the baby dead and skeletonized. Very creepy. And, of course, a satanic Bible, because every home needs a Bible.
What is a satanic Bible, though? I don't actually want to know, but is it like word for, because it could be a couple things, right? It could be like the Bible translated, but like every word is opposite, or it is like your code of ethics.
It's a book written by Anton LaVey, who's the founder of Satanism. And you may recall his daughter is Taylor Swift's mother.
That's right. How could I forget?
Remember?
From our...
How could you forget?
One of our most well-researched episodes.
Yeah.
Right.
And very truthful. So they got their manor. They got their 40 acres. They have a garden. They have a beehive where they're going to get their honey. And they have a chicken house on the property, which you would think would just house chickens, but turns out to be much stranger than that.
So in some ways, this is like such a beautiful... I mean, go look at a picture of this house that they built. I'm kind of stunned. I don't know how to put stained glass windows into houses. I don't know if they ultimately got like contractors or people to help, but this is truly a beautiful structure. If not for all the strange things within it, there would be nothing it wouldn't be creepy, you know, and it really is beautiful. It sounds amazing to have your own beehive, to have chickens, to have gardens. I think a lot of people right now are kind of moving towards this life anyway. So they're just a little bit ahead of their times, except for this chicken house that you're talking about. Now, Charles and Joey spent their days caring for the paradise that they built for themselves. No longer are they, you know, in the professional settings of the strictures of academia. This is their life now, taking care of each other, this property. They tend to the vineyard, the gardens, the beehives, chickens. They make candles. Remember, no electricity. So they don't have to go to the store all the time because with their beeswax, they're making candles. And also they make the nectar of life. They make wine, and they also chop wood because, again, they don't have electricity. It's not only heat, it's also how they cook. It is also how they see by the light of the fire. Now, Charles, he's really a very talented person. He enjoys playing the harp, and the pair genuinely enjoyed each other's company. However, it wasn't just beekeeping, candle making, chicken, egg collecting, and harp playing all day long. That may have been during the daytime, but the men had more lurid interests as well. You see, the chicken house has become a source of speculation for decades. It wasn't what you're imagining of a chicken coop with like some wire, even on wheels, perhaps, if you're a sustainable farmer where you move this like wire coop around. Rather, it's a 3-story house with each story for its own use. The first floor did, in fact, house chickens, so it was a chicken house. But that's kind of where the chicken house name ends. The middle floor was used to store canned goods, which sounds great. Of course, they have beehive, they have gardens, they have vineyards. It makes sense that they have somewhere to store all of their canned goods, but what else do they have to store? Of course, they have a large pornographic library along with their canned goods. But it doesn't stop there. On the 3rd floor, it was referred to as the Pink Room. The Pink Room was just that. It was painted entirely pink, devoid of all furniture except several mattresses covered with pink sheets. And it also contained whips, chains, and other items intended for sexual use. The Pink Room was their personal pleasure chamber. And they didn't have TVs. They had their own mulled wine. They had their wine. That was about it.
No podcast to listen to.
No podcast to listen to. So what did they do for fun? Well, most evenings at Corpsewood Manor would end in the Pink Room. And not just Charles and Joey. They would invite others to the Pink Room. And those who have entered the Pink Room and partaken in the things that happen in there report that the encounters were consensual, they were free of judgment, and they were often fueled by heavy pours of homemade wine. And it was in some ways a sexcapade of your Airbnbs, because not only did you get to participate, there was also this lovely journal where the guests could record their experiences and their sexual preferences for future visits to the Pink Room. Now, the men may have built this home to get away from mainstream society and the prying eyes of others, but in reality, you can imagine when you build a castle in the middle of North Georgia with a chicken house that is as large as another house, with a pink room where people get to write in detail the things they experience in this room. Rumors are going to start swirling in this small town, and they indeed do. You know, Tryon is conservative, and they do not like that there are, in their words, 2 gay devil worshippers hosting sex parties at their mountainside castle. That's as described by Atlanta Magazine. You can imagine how that's a rumor that just takes on a life of its own. There's really no part of it that's really a lie. That's really what's happening there. And not to mention, this is the height of the Satanic panic, causing even more questions from the nearby residents about what exactly is going on at Corpsewood Manor.
And can I just say this? If you want to have your huge pornography collection in your pink room, go for it. More power to you, right? It is very strange to have it in the chicken coop. I don't really understand why you couldn't have built 2 separate buildings. Yeah. Have a building for the chickens and maybe for the canned goods, and then have a room for I don't really know.
And then a sex house. You know what I think it is? We've talked about how hard it is to dig a grave. it's really hard to excavate a foundation for a house. And I think by the time they finish their castle and then the chicken house, they're like, let's just build up. Like, I don't want to have to dig out another foundation because a third house is just too much effort and we may never get this pink room built.
It's just got like chicken poop everywhere and it stinks and they're barking
Chickens really
all the
do
time.
stink. Look, I love chickens.
I mean,
As many people of my age, I would love to get chickens someday, but they really do stink. So it's not like the most pleasant smell to be in the same house as a chicken.
you know, I can't say that's not the only thing I don't understand about these guys, but it just the thing that sort of stood out to me the most was building the pink room over the chicken coop. But in any event, that's what they'd done. So let's move forward to the fall of 1982. So for a few years, everything's good, right? They're living there. The locals think they're weird. You can only imagine when they go into town to like sell their honey or whatever, the looks they get. But everything's fine. Well, in the fall of 1982, Kenneth Avery Brock, who is a 17-year-old boy with a troubled past, he is hunting on the property when he meets Charles and Joey. Now, he had heard about these two men that were living in the forest. He'd heard about the potent wine they had made, and he'd heard about their sexual proclivities, right? And I'm going to go out on a limb and say in Tryon, Georgia, that wasn't something that was ordinary. He goes out there, supposedly it's for hunting, but I think it's pretty clear that he was curious about all this. He meets the pair and they invite him back to the manor and to the pink room, and they all drink muscadine wine. At that point, Charles and Kenneth become intimate. And this is something that Kenneth would later say he felt embarrassed and angry about. This is also sort of a point of contention. There are people who claim that Kenneth really was just hunting on the property and got to know the guys and never had any relationship with them. I think it's pretty clear they did have this relationship. I mean, this whole thing is going to become very controversial and very, very convoluted as the events transpire. But whether he felt embarrassed about it or not, whether it happened or not, he would return to the manor multiple times, and he got to know the guys and they got to know him, and there wasn't anything unusual about seeing him, and he would bring his friend and roommate, Tony West.
And Tony West was an extremely troubled individual. When he was 13, something incredibly tragic happened that would change his life forever. He shot and killed his 2-year-old nephew while he was playing with a gun. Following that incident, he was admitted into a mental institution until he turned 18. You can imagine how incredibly traumatic that would be. But at 18, we didn't do great with, we maybe still don't do a great job with mental health care. But at 18, he's just kind of let out. And he never quite gets his life together, and he's later sentenced to jail for theft. He did escape prison, which Brett completely condones, and I still don't understand.
As is his right.
This is really, this may break apart the podcast.
It's the next part that's problematic. The escaping is fine.
This is why he shouldn't escape, because he escapes and he shoots his brother-in-law. So that part is not great, Brett. And that's what happens when you escape from jail sometimes, when you're supposed to be held in jail if you are a danger to society. But we digress. If you don't know what we're talking about, I don't know which episode it is. Go listen to one of the most heated discussions Brett and I ever have about your right to escape prison. I don't think you can. So in the fall of 1982, Tony was 30 years old and unemployed and had this troubled history, problems with the law and violence. After one particular evening at the manor, Tony and Kenneth start talking about Charles and Joey. And in their mind, they've been drinking all this wine. They're in the middle of this seeming paradise in the middle of the woods. And they decide Charles and Joey have to be really rich. After all, they have this castle in the woods. And later on, whether this is actually true or not, Kenneth is going to say he's been angry at Charles this entire time because of the intimacy they shared, even though he continues to come back and even bring his friends into these relationships. But this fuels their next plot. They're going to rob Corpsewood Manor.
And you can see how this is such a toxic relationship, because you have Tony, who is deeply troubled, who is violent, who has a serious criminal history. He's 30 years old. He doesn't have a job. Somehow, Kenneth, who's only Yeah, who's 17, is living there with him. Kenneth is experimenting with various things. It would not surprise me if Tony was the one who convinced him he should be embarrassed by that. He should be angry about it to try and get him to do this thing he wants to do. The relationship between these two is one of those things that you could spend a good amount of time looking at, because there's so much sort of psychological issues there, the codependency, the age difference, the violence, the influence of the older person, how all this is coming together to create this toxic soup that's going to result in a crime. So they've made this decision as 1982 is drawing to a close, and by now it's December of 1982. And Kenneth, he visits Corpsewood with the intent of getting into the manor so he can scope the place out. He wants to identify where the valuables are kept. Now, he'd been there several times, but he'd never been inside the house. He'd only been to the chicken house, because that's where the pink room is, where the wine flows. You know, you got the canned corn if you want some on the second floor, if you want to have some canned food while you're there. And so that's the only place he'd been. He goes out there, but the mission is unsuccessful. They won't allow him in. I guess the manor sort of remains the sacred place. We got the chicken coop, and then we got the manor, and never the twain shall meet. And there in fact were very few people who had ever been welcomed into the manor, and this fact only fuels the suspicion of these two young men that there must be something really valuable in that house they don't want people to see.
So on December 12th, Brock and Wes decide to put their plan into action. So Kenneth borrows his mother's .22 caliber rifle, telling her that he's going rabbit hunting. Tony and Kenneth decide to go to Tony's sister's trailer first to watch some football. And Tony's nephew, 19-year-old Joey Wells, and his date, Teresa Huggins, were also at the trailer, meaning all five of them were hanging out. And despite this kind of plot to rob the manor, for some reason, Tony and Kenneth decide to take along Joey, the 19-year-old nephew, and his date, Teresa, along with them to the manor. It's not entirely clear why. I don't think they've ever been there before. Usually, here's a tip for committing crimes: the fewer people who are in on it, the easier to keep a conspiracy, and also the fewer witnesses you have. So not totally clear what they envision happening, but at least Kenneth is coming with a rifle, so it is not an empty threat in terms of what he's about to do. That evening, the four of them get into Tony's AMC Javelin and they leave the trailer. They stop at the Red Barn convenience store for gas and a pack of cigarettes. And when they leave the gas station, Tony, I don't know why, informs the gas station that they're going to the top of the mountain to the devil worshipper's house. And Teresa had never heard of this place. Remember, she's just Joey's date. She's like, say what? What are you talking about? She's never heard of the manor. And she says, what are you talking about? And Tony says, well, it's just and this is a quote, this is just a couple of gay men with homemade wine. That's where we're going to go. And so that's where he says they're going to go. But to pregame, before going over to the manor, they begin to get high on paint thinner, glue, and alcohol, which they called Toodaloo. It's a great name. I guess by the time you sniff all that, I would call it Toodaloo too.
There you go. And they're in their AMC Javelin, American Motor Company. For those of you who don't know, little piece of trivia, that's how the Romney family made their money. Mitt Romney's dad was CEO of the American Motor Company. Don't think it's around anymore. Don't know what happened to it. But as we're going to see, weren't the most reliable vehicles. But in any event, they arrive at the manor and Charles greets them. And he's like, hey, never seen these two people, but that's fine. Always up for a party. Invites
Which, by the way,
them all
can
up.
I just say it's such a juxtaposition? Like, no one's allowed inside the manor, but anyone's allowed in the chicken coop.
I would say that's the thing.
It's very strange.
I think, it's a very interesting, you're right. And I guess maybe,
I think
still don't know why they didn't just
honestly,
build.
I think it's the separation of like their lives, right?
Yeah.
Like this is their proper life in terms of like, I don't know how you want to portray yourself. They had 2 bedrooms in there, but yet they have this entire pink room. Like why have the farce of 2 bedrooms in the manor when you have like a pink room that doesn't even have beds? Like beds would be dignified. These are literally mattresses on the floor. It's almost like this is where we party. this is where we eat, so don't mess up where we eat.
Well, they have the manor. It's where they're like the lords, high society. And then they've got sort of the farming life with the chicken coop and the pink room, right? But yeah, they are separated. And I think, once again, I think this goes to the psychology of the crime, because you're thinking, why wouldn't they let us in there? There must be just stacks of gold in there or something, right? I mean, that's what they're thinking. So he invites them in. They go up to the pink room. They're hanging out. They're drinking wine. Kenneth leaves the room claiming he wants to go get more Toodaloo, which I'm with you, Alice. I love that. But when he returns, he has the rifle in his hand. Now, Charles doesn't think anything of it. He actually laughs and says, bang, bang. So is he really that casual about it, or is he trying to blow it off, hoping he can defuse the situation? I don't know. But it kind of works for a while, because Brock laughs and sits back down, and the group continues hanging out. They continue drinking more. Another 20 minutes pass. The lamp is kind of dying, so Charles gets up to take care of that. But when he does, Kenneth jumps up, grabs him by the hair, pulls his head back, and puts a knife to his throat. Charles, still either not aware of what's happening or still trying to play it down, says, "What kind of game do you want to play? I'll play your game." Kenneth then throws Charles onto a mattress and ties his hands behind his back with pieces of torn sheet. At this point, he demands to know where the money was kept. But Charles says there isn't any money. He says that he and Joey kept all their money in the bank, and in fact, they were strictly budgeting that money. Remember, they had a stream of income, but it was pretty small. I mean, everything was a lot cheaper back then, so it went further, but they were budgeting it out so they could continue to live their life, and they basically lived off the land. It wasn't like they were going in and buying really expensive stuff, and so that's what they were doing. There was no hidden wealth. Now, Teresa, who had no idea that this was going to happen, is hysterical. Her and Joey Wales actually run down the ladder and try to get away in the car, but it wouldn't start. Once again, like a horror movie, you're trying to get away, car won't start. Tony follows them out and threatens them with the gun and says, "Look, you either come back to the pink room or something bad's going to happen to you." Meanwhile, Kenneth is still demanding that Charles tell him where the money's hidden, and he keeps telling him there isn't any money. Growing frustrated, this is when Kenneth snaps. He goes to the manor where Joey is to see if he can get any answers from him. He takes the gun, he goes down there, and he yells, "Get the dogs and come out of the house." He's talking to Joey. The next thing the group hears is the sound of gunfire. And Kenneth Brock proudly announces, "I killed that man and those dogs."
Like, this has really escalated incredibly quickly. Remember, the very first time that Charles meets Kenneth, he has a gun because he was hunting on their land, right? So whether he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation or this is part of the game, there's other accoutrements in the pink room for this type of play. And so it all of a sudden escalates. And it's not like Joey didn't even have time. They didn't hear any sort of discussion. It seemed like he went down there to kill Joey and the poor dogs. So Charles is bound further at this point. Now it's no longer a game. He cannot get out of his bondage. And he's dragged out of the pink room and into the manor, where he sees Joey and his two beloved dogs dead in the kitchen. And when I say that there wasn't any conversation, the dogs hadn't even gotten up from their place. They were still chained to the wood heater where they had been shot dead. And the captors pushed Charles into the library, and they lift his gag just enough to ask him again, "Where is the money?" Charles this time says, "I asked for this," which is a very interesting response. Here he sees his, companion who he lives with shot dead, his two dogs dead. He probably knows what's coming to him as well. Now, despite being bound and having his captors right around him, Charles stands up and he tries to walk towards Joey, who's already been shot. And Tony screams at him to sit back down or he's going to shoot him again. But Charles is undeterred. He continues to walk towards Joey. And Tony responds on his threat and starts shooting Charles in the face. and Charles is brought down to his knees, but he's not killed. He tries yet again to stand up, and Tony fires 3 more rounds into Charles's head. This is incredibly brutal. They haven't found any money. There appears to be no money. And now, all of a sudden, within a span of minutes, we have 2 men shot in the face in their own home with no self-defense. The robbers are absolutely giddy because here they think we have neutralized the threat. We are going to be so rich now that we can look through the manor and see what they've been hiding from us. But like Charles had said, there was no cash in the house. They had murdered 2 men and their dogs for essentially nothing. They had some coins, a little bit of jewelry. They took a leather jacket, a pair of handcuffs, which probably was more for play than anything, and some wine, and a gold-plated dagger with some jewels on the handle. A couple candelabras, remember all they had were candles, and they took a pistol. That was it. There was really nothing of value in that castle. Charles was not kidding. The things of value was the manor itself, that it was away from society. And while they were looting the place, Charles actually makes a faint sound. And so Kenneth turns around and fires a 5th round into Charles's head.
Yeah, I mean, this is about as brutal as it gets. And as Alice said, it was all for nothing, even though in reality there were items that were worth a lot of money in the home. They had furnished it with 16th century furniture, which obviously I don't think any of these people would have recognized. They also wouldn't have recognized the valuable artwork that hung from the walls. And then there were 3 bottles of probably what just looked to them as clear liquid, but in fact was pure LSD. And there's no telling how much that LSD was worth. None of this was taken by the thieves. Now, Teresa refused to participate in any of this. She is still freaking out the whole time.
This is like the world's worst date ever.
Absolutely. Joey Wells, who was her date, there's a lot of controversy about how much he was involved in this. He says he wasn't involved in the murders, didn't help with the stealing either. But Teresa would later say, no, actually, he was stealing some stuff himself. So they all load the loot into the Jeep. Kenneth, he takes off in the Jeep, and they finally are able to get the Javelin to start. So the rest of the group leaves with Tony. Now, Joey and Teresa, who, as Alice said, never should have been brought to this event, the pair of killers threaten them and say, look, you've seen what we'll do. You tell anybody about this, we're going to do the same thing to you. Well, Teresa, she's freaking out the whole time. They actually get back to Tony's house, and she tells his sister about what happened. And so his sister does what anyone would do. Basically kidnaps her and holds her hostage in the trailer for 4 days to ensure that she wouldn't go to the police.
I would not do that for my brother. That is not something I would do for my brother. But I mean,
like, where do you think this is going to end? I mean, the lack of any forethought at all in these kind of crimes.
And that's the thing, right? I mean, obviously you've heard all about Charles and Joey and how they ended up here. You probably were thinking, like most people thought, oh, these Church of Satan guys living in the woods, they're about to do something horrid in their chicken house to someone else. Maybe these unsuspecting teenagers who wander onto their land. But flip it around. They were doing nothing to hurt anyone. Okay, so they liked satanic art. They liked, not artwork I would choose for my own home, but they literally were hurting no one. In fact, they were incredibly hospitable. The only thing they didn't do was to keep cash around, which ultimately leads to this brutal end. And I don't know. I mean, we do know that Tony had shot multiple people before, but this was not a long drawn out. I don't think they cared at all if they killed Charles and Joey. I think the intent all along was to kill them because whatever, all they wanted was some easy cash, and they weren't really good at robbing places. Like if they had seen the furniture or the artwork, they could have made a lot more money. They were literally looking for a quick buck, which they did not get. So now what do? Because you did a double murder, you have witnesses, you have nothing to show for it. Well, On December 13th, 1982, Kenneth and Tony, they take the Jeep to Mississippi. They're on the run, and they stop at a rest stop late that evening to sleep and regroup and make plans to steal a car that's less conspicuous than the Jeep, which had pentacles painted on it. And also, it's like the victims' cars, you know, like usually want to ditch that pretty soon, but they've already driven to Mississippi. So they're like, we're going to ditch the Satanic car and look for something that blends in a little bit better in Mississippi.
The Pinnacles really,
they really give it away. And so while they're kind of trying to hash this out, Navy Lieutenant Kirby Key Phelps is sleeping in his Toyota next to the men. And the men look over and think, perfect opportunity. We're going to rob him and take his car. So they put the gun to Phelps's head, and he immediately, he doesn't give up a fight. He says, take anything you want. Don't hurt me. And the men handcuff him, and Tony leads him to a nearby woods where Kenneth transferred all of their loot from the Jeep to the Toyota because they're about to steal the Toyota. Now, Tony tries to handcuff Phelps to a tree. If you've ever tried to do that, it's not easy because a tree kind of has a thick trunk. So, unsurprisingly,
you have a lot of experience in this, in handcuffing people to a tree.
I have not personally.
Just the things we learn about you, Alice, when we're doing these podcasts.
Let me teach you about physics, because we've been doing a lot of math in this. If you're trying to get your hands that are handcuffed together to go around a structure without going over or under, what do you have to do? You have to unhandcuff one hand in order to then rehandcuff around the tree, right? You don't have to be a genius to know that, Brett, but even I know that. Wow. It's when Phelps has one hand removed from the handcuff that he's a Navy lieutenant. He takes this opportunity to punch Tony in the face to try and get away. But unfortunately, we now know how incredibly violent Tony is, because Tony responds by shooting Phelps 3 times in the head and instantly kills him. That's not enough. Tony steals the dead man's wallet and heads back to the rest stop, leaving Phelps's body in the woods. So the 2 men abandon the Jeep nearby, and they continue on in Phelps's stolen Toyota, heading towards Mexico. Again, I don't know what the game plan is.
Yeah, the classic. We're going to go to Mexico, get across the border, and then something.
Scott Peterson.
Yeah, exactly. No, he just, he was
just dyeing his hair, hanging out.
Yeah, and like somebody's family accidentally took out $15,000 in cash, and he was just holding it for him. I don't know what you're talking about. It's easily explained. He's obviously innocent. Anyways, going back to this case, on December 15th, 1982, that's 2 days after he is murdered, Phelps's body was discovered. And that same day, Charles and Joey's friend, Raymond Williams, decides he's going to stop by the manor and see how the guys are doing. But when he gets there, he is met with this gruesome scene. He immediately races back to town and notifies the Chattooga County Sheriff's Office about his discovery. And they are on the scene within the hour, and they've got the Georgia Bureau investigation with them and the state crime lab trying to figure out what happened. Later that day, the Jeep is discovered in Tallulah, Louisiana, and is quickly connected back to what has happened. They also find .22 caliber bullets in the vehicle, and we're able to confirm that those are consistent with the bullets used to kill the men. They also find that the vehicle had been parked at the rest stop where Phelps's body was found. So at this point, they're putting it all together. This is not a hard crime to figure out here exactly what happened. And they now know that these murders in Georgia and the one in Mississippi are linked, and they're looking for the same people or person for both crimes. Around the same time, the next day, Teresa is able to escape from her captivity where she's being held and get to her uncle and tells him everything that happened. At this point, she goes back to her parents' house. The sheriff's department shows up, and she tells them what happened as well. So now the police know exactly who is responsible for this crime.
On December 18th, 1982, arrest warrants are issued for Kenneth, Brock, and Tony West. And the pair parted ways in Texas after they got in a fight. So they're no longer traveling together. Kenneth hitchhikes back to Georgia, and he stops in Marietta where he calls his mom and he tells her everything. I think you can begin to tell, like, he's he's a kid, right? He's like a 17-year-old, and he's like, what have I done? So this is all falling apart. He doesn't know what else to do. So he essentially goes back home and tells his mom. Now he walks into a gas station and tells the attendant he's wanted for murder, and police immediately swarm the gas station and they arrest him without incidents. It wouldn't be for about another week more before Tony is found. On December 24th, 1982, Tony runs out of gas in Chattanooga. It's really interesting that they're all going back to Georgia. And I think this just shows you how ill thought out this entire plan was. There wasn't some grand plan. And also, they don't have enough money. They didn't get a bunch of riches where they can actually go start a new life somewhere. And just before the Georgia line, he's exhausted and he walks up to a police officer. He holds out his hands and he confesses to everything he's done. So both men essentially walk into the police station themselves. In February of 1983, there are legal proceedings underway, but they don't take very long because both men really have already confessed. So Kenneth admits that he killed Joey and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms. I like to think that's for Joey and also the 2 dogs, which I approve. And Tony was charged with murdering Charles, but he pleaded innocent or not guilty. Now, ultimately, Kenneth was sentenced to life in prison. It was due to his age. He was very young, and also because he pled guilty. We've talked about how when you accept responsibility, sometimes the judge will look more favorably upon you for sentencing purposes, whereas Tony was sentenced to death. Now, the following year, Tony did appeal, and he did plead guilty in exchange for getting life in prison. He was like, well, last time I did this, I got the death penalty, so I'm just going to plead guilty. So justice did come swiftly for Charles and Joey.
Honestly, I don't know why they agreed to give him life in prison. Seems like a pretty solid...
Killing a Navy lieutenant as well. This is his, okay, you don't want to count the 2-year-old accidental shooting, but this isn't his first shooting, right? We know if we call him a trigger puller is what we call him in the justice system.
Honestly, I'm surprised that killing the Navy lieutenant didn't result in a separate charge because, as we're about to see, there were things that they talked about in the trial that you can imagine with the right jury sort of lead to almost a jury nullification thing. So what he had said happened was that these murders were an act of revenge for a sexual assault is probably a strong way to put it. But remember, Kenneth had made these claims that he was embarrassed, that, and look, I mean, Kenneth was only 17. So you certainly could say that he was taken advantage of no matter what. 17, he's not an adult. Certainly what happened probably shouldn't have happened. So you see this attempt by Tony to sort of curry some favor here and say, look, these murders were revenge for that. And he also tried to claim that he was under the influence of drugs at the time, and not drugs that he had decided to take, but that the wine had been spiked with LSD. Now, one of the problems with this argument was that there had been forensic analysis of the wine, and there were no traces of LSD. But obviously the claim was, well, yeah, because it was in the cup or whatever, and you didn't test that. So these weren't terrible arguments given the time. Given the satanic panic, given the way these men live their lives, you can imagine how maybe, like I said, you get the right jury, you might get a favorable outcome. So I guess that probably is what led to this deal that took the death penalty off the table. And the defense, much like Delphi now, the defense was fine using the satanic panic to their benefit. They claimed that, in fact, the 2 men had been bewitched. And the harp that we talked about was actually magical, and that they used the harp, that it glowed, it pulsed with an evil glow. I mean, can you imagine if you're a lawyer making this argument? But nevertheless, and that was the satanic power taking over these men, and that's why they couldn't help but do what they did. Nevertheless, he eventually takes the deal. He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. And in fact, both men are incarcerated to this day. Kenneth is serving his sentence at Coffee Correctional Facility in Nichols, Georgia, and Tony is incarcerated at Wilcox State Prison in Abbeville, Georgia. Now, this case is bad enough, it's tragic enough, and it has enough unusual aspects to make it appropriate for Halloween. But there is one little detail left that makes this more than just your standard crime. So sometime after his accident, remember, Joey and Charles had been in a car wreck, and Joey had damage to his brain. And so he had issues with that, and it included hallucinations at times. And sometime after that accident, Joey actually had a vision. And in that vision, he saw Charles gagged with 5 bullet wounds in his head. Now, he tells Charles about this vision, and Charles gets up and immediately paints a picture of himself gagged with 5 bullet holes in his head. And in fact, the robbers would notice this painting as they were leaving the crime scene, where they had just left Charles dead, gagged with 5 bullet holes in his head.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that, except this story really did take such a twist, right? The Satanic Panic wasn't at the center of the story whatsoever. Who you think, and this just goes to show you, by the way, that we all do have preconceived notions of who we think victims and perpetrators are. And this case kind of turned it on its head. And whether it was a premonition or a creepy coincidence, it was devastating what happened to Charles and Joey, because they weren't bothering anybody. They lived a life that a lot of people may have disapproved of, but they were also like, if you don't like it, don't come to the chicken coop, right? And here we have 2 men just inflicting utter horror on them. And that was crazy to me when I found out that they're still serving their sentences.
Yeah, well, life in prison is a long time, particularly when you're 17, when you commit the murder. But I don't think they'll ever get out, and nor should they, for what they did. And you're right. I mean, it's a terrible crime. It's one that I think, frankly, it's kind of surprising that it's not more well known. I always assume that crimes are not well known if I don't know them very well. And this was not one that I knew well. So I had heard of it sort of in passing, but I didn't know it as well as maybe you would expect. So hopefully you guys learned something from this one. It is a tragedy. I think there's a lot to take away from it. Like I said, I think the psychology of this relationship between this 30-year-old with this violent past and a 17-year-old and what happened is something that is fascinating to think about, and definitely a case horrific enough to be worthy of Halloween. And this is what I always tell people, the people who don't listen. I mean, this is pure true crime. I mean, this is a terrible case. We could have covered it at any time, but it has sort of enough. What's great about it, great relative in true crime, is what Alice was saying and what I mentioned earlier, the twist, the fact that it's flipped, that if this were a horror movie, you would fully expect to see the 2 men be the evil ones. They're the ones who, worship Satan and everything else. Well, they don't actually worship Satan, but you know what I mean. But at the end, it's not the teenagers who are being killed one after another until they're all whittled down to the last survivor to fight the 2 Satanists. In fact, it's the Satanists who are the victims. So, well, if you didn't enjoy that, you should enjoy a great horror movie. Since we're talking about Satanism, there's a movie called House of the Devil. And it's actually a more recent horror movie. I think it was in 2009, 2010 or so. But it's set in the early 80s, and it has the feel of an early 80s horror movie. And it also has that sort of classic cult type thing going on. It's a slow burn. It's really freaky. You will enjoy it. When you're listening to this, it will be October, and you need to be thinking about all the great horror movies you're going to watch. So that's going to be my recommendation for you guys tonight. I don't know, in the past we've watched horror movies. That became kind of a year-long thing. So I think most of you who watched horror movies with me during October now watch them with me all the time. But maybe we'll watch House of the Devil. Yeah, no. They actually roped Alice into watching a horror movie. They tricked her.
I'm not going to say trick because I love you guys too much, but y'all tricked me. You told me it was a cooking show. It was not a cooking show. I still can't step foot into a restaurant to this day. Thanks to all of you. I have to do HelloFresh every day at home now.
There you go.
Buy HelloFresh.
There you go. It's an advertisement for HelloFresh. You don't have to worry about accidentally going to a restaurant that's secretly the home of a serial killer. So there you go. House of the Devil. We'll probably watch it Join us on Facebook. If you're not a member of the gallery, join the gallery, and we'll watch House of the Devil together. And speaking of the gallery, if you have thoughts about this case, email us, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for all your social media. If you do want to talk about this case with fans of the podcast, we have a great fan-run group on Facebook called The Gallery. There's about 10,000 people in it right now, and they love to talk about these cases. And there's a lot of subgroups. If you like to cook, if you like to read books, there's people who do all that as well. You can talk to them about that. You can join the chats, whatever you want to do. It's a great community if you really like the show. And we are so happy that so many of you have come together and become friends in real life through the podcast. It kind of blows my mind. Also, we are recording this in August with our patrons. So if you really love October, you could have been doing Halloween for the last month and a half if you were a patron of the show. So go to Patreon, join. It's $3 a month, and you get everything. We're really terrible business people. So $3 a month. It's less than a Big Mac, right? You can be a part of this, and you can see all the bloopers happen live. Today we were perfect.
We don't have time.
Yesterday,
We don't have time to edit it when you watch live.
Yeah, exactly. You just get to experience it. So do that. Thank you to everybody who joined us tonight. I love you guys because I send out the emails like 3 hours before the show, and people still show up to watch. So it makes me happy. Alice, do you have time for a question tonight?
Absolutely. We told people, remember, October, folks, you get questions every time, even if it's a long episode.
There you go. There you go. And if you're unfamiliar with the questions, if you leave a 5-star review on Apple or really any service, if it's not Apple, just send me an email that just says, I left a 5-star review. Even if you didn't, I'll believe you. And include a question, and we will answer your question live on the show. We got a ton of them that we're working through. I think we got over, let's see, how many do we have? We have over 300 questions that have been submitted. So we got a lot to get through,
list
but
is
it's fine.
growing much faster than we're answering. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you really should leave a Legal Briefs review.
You really should. Or we'll just do an entire, that's a great idea. Someone had said it earlier. We'll do a Halloween question and answer. We'll just fly through them, read them dramatically in costume.
Read them dramatically. Okay, here you go, Alice. This is from Valentine Grammy, which is not a very scary name, but it includes a holiday, so I'm going to go with roughly attached to Halloween. The question is, when you were in law school, what area of the law did you find most interesting? Did that change once you started working as a lawyer? It's a great question. What do you think, Alice?
I shouldn't answer this. I found none of the law interesting. I found all the things around the law. So I always loved practicing, right? Like I was that weird law student who did like 3 clinics. I loved, I represented children in abuse and neglect proceedings, and sitting in a classroom to me felt so stifling because I wanted to be out there to do the work. Obviously you should learn it first and then do it. But that was always me in law school. I wanted to be out there practicing what I went to law school for. I was impatient, but I did love tax. Let me tell you why. Because I had a hilarious professor who was not a tax professor. This is Yale for you. My contracts professor wasn't a contracts lawyer. My property professor was not a property lawyer. My tax professor he thought about tax esoterically, but he was not, in fact, a tax lawyer. And I'll tell you why. Because I took the class and many years later had a tax case and someone said, well, look in the code. And I was like, the what? And they're like, the code. And I was like, what code are you talking about? They're like, you took tax, right? And I was like, of course I did. And they're like, the tax code. And I was like, there's a tax code? I never got me one of those.
This is Ivy League education.
This is Ivy League education at its best. If you haven't heard our rant about Ivy League education, we'll recreate it for you because it's still as applicable today as it was when I went to law school. So the very first day of this tax class, he walks in and he speaks like a professor. I love this guy. I really do. And he walks in and he sits cross-legged on top of the desk and he moves the podium aside and he says, hello, class. This is literally his affect. Any one of you in my tax class, you can say that I have a fantastic impression of this professor. And I'm not going to make fun of him because he's a very brilliant guy. He has lots of textbooks written, even though he's never practiced law. And he goes, you are in tax class, in case we didn't know. He was like, and he pulls an apple out of his very battered leather briefcase that he'd made himself. And he said, You see this? I'm going to teach you tax like I taught my toddler. I said, names have been changed for privacy reasons. Josie, what would you like to eat? Josie, being 4, said, an apple, Daddy. Actually, he calls him by his first name. Names will change for this. I would like an apple, Tony. He says, we're all equals here. Absolutely, Josie. Let me go get you your apple. Tony goes and picks up an apple, and he washes it carefully for sweet Josie. And he looks at it, and he says, Josie, I picked you the best apple. And he hands it to her. But as she reaches out, looking lovingly at her father, Tony, and says, thank you, Tony. Tony snatches it back, takes a big bite out of it, and with his saliva all over it, gives it back to Josie. And Josie says, Tony, why would you do that to my beautiful apple? And Tony said, Josie, that's taxation.
I mean, at least he taught you what taxation was. I mean, you know.
So that's why I failed the exam. Anyways,
yeah.
So because of that class, I loved tax, even though I don't really love tax law.
Have I told my story? You know, when you're 260 whatever episodes in,
who cares?
Say
the story again. It's probably
the story
great.
she told. But my torts professor was the same way. Well, actually, he was far worse. My torts professor. I'm going to tell several
our
stories
professors
about
probably all went to each other's schools.
Probably
if they didn't
did.
teach there, they went there.
So my torts professor, he had been Castro's lawyer at one point. And he kind of dressed like him too. Like he wore like green fatigues to class. He also apparently had invented the mass tort, which was interesting. And he was super controversial. I mean, he did things that you can only do when you have tenure at a law school. So I'm going to tell you one of the things he did. And I just want to point out, this is exactly what he said. So do not leave any 1-star reviews about this. He was talking about torts and lawsuits, and he was talking about how government regulations and laws can create situations that are torturous.
Not tortuous, but tortuous.
Not tortuous. So when you can be sued, even though you wouldn't normally be able to. And he said it's like with handicapped people. And he said, you got to watch out when one of those people rolls into a room, someone's rights are being rolled over. He actually said that.
No, he did not.
In a class. At one point, he said something. It wasn't that. It was something else that got him removed from teaching. So they couldn't fire him. So they just removed him from teaching. They wouldn't let him teach that year.
Isn't that crazy that you can't be fired from teaching? It
so
says
he
a
would
lot.
He would sit in the back of the room while the substitute guy was teaching and like comment on what the guy was teaching.
He was heckling the
much.
like replacement teacher.
Yeah. And so when I was a 1L, this is my torts professor. And torts is really important. Torts, for those of you who don't know, is like civil litigation. When you sue someone for running over you or killing
Anytime you
your
get hurt.
husband. Yeah. Lawsuits, like anything like that. That's what torts is. So you really need to learn it. Another thing he would do, people would find him. They would go to the library in the middle of the night, you know, because they're studying for something. They go to the library would be completely deserted, and they would see him wandering through the stacks where the books were. And what he was doing is he would pull books out, look in them, read them, and then he would take out a sticky, put it in the book, and write comments on whatever it said. So if you checked books out at the library, every now and then you get a book, and in it, like at page 187, would be a sticky note with his comments on whatever.
That is literally the
was written in the book.
definition of the luxury of time. Like, who the heck has time to do that?
The first day of class, he comes in and he says, "This is torts. I don't believe in torts." He says, I haven't told you this. He's like, we're not going to learn any of the cases you learn. All the cases you've heard about that are famous, we're not going to learn any of those cases. We're not going to do that. If you cite a case on my final, that's a grade letter off.
If you cite a case.
Yeah. If I think you've read a horn book on torts, I will fail you. No, he couldn't actually fail you. But he would say that. And he had this whole theory of torts that was like, the way the tort system should work is what's good for America. And he had a scale from 1 to 10 about what's good for America. And it was like really weird. Like Dean Kagan was number 8. So I guess he liked Dean Kagan. But like Superman was number one. He really didn't like Superman. And like the Monopoly, Mr. Moneybags, whatever, he was like number 3. And it was just these like random things. And he would present these scenarios and he would be like, so what's good for America? How should we figure this out? How should it work? Not how it does work, but how should it work to be useful for America? So basically, I didn't know anything about torts at all. That was when I took the bar, like I had to just learn torts through bar review because I didn't learn anything about it.
100%.
I got a B+ in that class and I've never been happier to get out with a B. I was like, great. I'm out of here. Good luck. Yeah. So that didn't really answer the question about
that didn't
what my
answer the
favorite stuff
question
was.
at all. And I really am very thankful I have a law degree, but I'm not sure I learned a lot there.
So my favorite, though, the things that I did, much like college, where I did things that were absolutely useless. I was a history major. In law school, I took all the like constitutional history classes. So basically, if there was a class that was about what happened between pre-revolution through through the Civil War, pretty much, like I was on top of it, or the post-Civil War Reconstruction Amendment era. I mean, that was like, I loved that stuff. So I took all those classes. I knew about all that stuff. Absolutely worthless. You talk about what do you use in the law? Basically nothing you learn in law school, but certainly not that. Though I will say this, because you don't use anything you learn in law school, especially if you go to an Ivy League school, take whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
I mean,
just edify
truthfully,
yourself.
this is why when people are like, oh, I could never go to law school. I'm like, you could. Because really what law school is, it's teaching you how to think, right? That's why, I mean, the joke at Yale was that all of our classes were law and classes. Like we didn't have law classes. You didn't have tax law. You had law and the suffering of Job. Literally, that was a class. One of the most sought after classes was a book of Job from the Bible class on law and the suffering. So everything was law and rather than law. But the idea behind it, of course, is ways to think outside the box. Think for yourself, which is something that we always encourage all of you guys to do, is to don't just swim along with the current because that's what everyone's doing.
Yeah, I got lots of stories I could tell about law school and my professors.
That could be a whole nother podcast.
That could be a whole and we've been going a while. So I won't talk about how my ethics class was just movies.
You had an ethics class because I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. It was required. We went in, the professor pushed play on the movie and left. And you could stay if you wanted to and watch the movie, or you could leave.
That was the test, Brett.
The test was a group final. We all got the same grade. So, anyway, that's ethics for you.
Oh, my goodness. Anyways, you guys should ask questions, and we are totally exposing just how little we know about the law.
Yeah, exactly.
This is all on-the-job training for sure.
For sure. Particularly torts. Okay, well, this has been awesome. Great way to start out October. A horrifying case and horrifying insight into the state of legal education at the highest levels. That's what we learned today. And we'll be back next week with more Halloween, October awesomeness. I will say this. I took the criticism of the 20% to heart last year. So this year's episodes, way spookier. This is the most true crime one we're going to do.
Way spookier.
I tried to do true crime last year.
I will have to say, look, as though I will be the representative of the 20%. So if you're listening, 20 percentillers, my favorite cases have truly always been the October ones. I loved Roland Doe. I loved Salem Witch Trials. I mean, some of the favorite episodes of our hundreds of episodes we've ever done have been the ones that I've been most reluctant to do. So you're missing out.
Well, next week, we're having an honest to goodness ghost story. So I hope you guys are ready for that. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
What are we doing? Huh, 1 second. What? Is this right? Is this right? Yep, level's good. Okay. Huh. Alright.
But theoretically, this is like a Christmas song, if you think about it.
Getting all philosophical here. Alright. Sorry, just checking my levels. Okay, anyways, let's do this.
Okay, here we go. But what really happens at this mountain escape? Satanism, sex parties, and ultimately, murder.
Murder?
Murder?
Sorry.
Did you know you can watch all your favorite crime shows for free on Pluto TV?
Totally free?
Totally free. They've got CSI New York, NCIS, Criminal Minds, Blue Bloods, Tracker, FBI, SWAT, all for free.
There's something suspicious going on here.
Nothing suspicious, just hundreds of free crime shows. On Pluto TV, crime never pays, and neither do I.
Pluto TV.
Stream now, pay never.